Hello, uh, Thomas sir.
Sir, we shall start at 6:35, sir. 6:35.
6:35
Namaskar,
now.
namaskar everybody. Namaskar everybody.
It is time to start, sir. It is
Okay.
6:35, sir. It is time to start.
Okay. Good morning. Hello. Hello. Good evening to everybody. Friends, on behalf of Philosophy family, it's my pride, privilege to extend a hearty welcome to all of you in the Sunday webinar on the theme secularism. Friends, your presence is much encouraging for all of us. Friends, today in the first session, we have invited Dr. Ashok Kumar Tarai, Assistant Professor, School of Philosophy, GM University, Sambalpur, to speak on the topic debating secularism in the first session. Professor Uma Chattopadhyay has been invited in the second session. She is the former professor, Department of Philosophy, University of Calcutta. Today, Madam Chattopadhyay will speak on the defending secularism. Friends, you know that India's unique brand of secularism has guaranteed all persons freedom from many respects, which is a debating factor for all of us. Friends, you know that India's secular structure faces a profound crisis. The time has come to defend it. Friends, both the topics on secularism will provide us a deep philosophical reflection in the socio-political scenario of the country. I welcome both the speakers, Professor Tarai and Professor Chattopadhyay, to today's academic platform. But before inviting them to speak on their scheduled topic, let me reflect on their academic achievement and outstanding teaching and research activities. You know, Dr. Ashok Kumar Tarai, Assistant Professor, the School of Philosophy, GM University, Sambalpur. He has joined in GM University in the year 2019. But before his present assignment in GM University, he was working in Sri Mata Vaishnava Devi University, Jammu Kashmir from 2012 to 2019, more than 7 years as assistant professor. Dr. Tarai did his master degree, MPhil, and PhD from the University of Hyderabad. He has also qualified NET from UGC. You know, Dr. Tarai keeps research interest in the philosophy of Wittgenstein, analytic philosophy, socio and political philosophy. Dr. Tarai completed a number of MOOC certificate courses from different Indian universities. To his credits, he has 15 research publications, both in national and international report journals. He has attended 25 national conferences and workshops, and he has delivered talks. Professor Tarai has chaired many national sessions and has invited to many colleges and universities to speak on different areas on philosophy. Dr. Tarai has also coordinated a different ICPR-sponsored lecture programs while Philosophy Day, whenever he was in the previous university and in the present university. Dr. Tarai is the life member of All Orsa Philosophy Association, Indian Philosophical Congress, British Wittgenstein Society, and many other ethical and philosophical forums that I do not want to reflect upon them. I feel honored to welcome Professor Tarai to Philosophy family in the first session. Our second speaker is Professor Uma Chattopadhyay. She has honored us by her gracious presence, Professor Chattopadhyay is a retired professor of Calcutta University. She has more than 30 years of teaching experience, both in college level and university level. Professor Chattopadhyay now is working as guest faculty in the Department of Philosophy, Sanskrit College and University. Professor Chattopadhyay joined in West Bengal Education Service in the year 1985 and up to 2005. Then she joined in university. She has different, she is assigned in different government colleges as assistant professor, associate professor, and professor. Dr. Chattopadhyay did her UG, PG, and PhD from Jadavpur University. Professor Chattopadhyay's interest in teaching and research, particularly in the subjects like Indian and Western philosophy, Indian logic and epistemology, philosophy for religion, and ethics. Professor Chattopadhyay is the writer of 2 monograms. These are not by philosophers, Upamana in Indian epistemology. Another is Faultless to a Fault, Gangesha and Upamana. Professor Chattopadhyay presented many papers in different national and international journals. She has also presented papers at Uppsala University, Sweden, Asian, Paris, Rupa University, Japan in the last 15 years. To her credit, Professor Chattopadhyay contributed many research papers to different national and international workshops and journals. She has the ability to make most complex concepts understandable before the students. She has a long passion in making teaching to make it a very simple manner, and she has also a passion to make teaching very interesting and to create a lot for studies and reflective thinking. I welcome both the speakers to our philosophy family. With this, I also welcome all the senior professors, students and scholars of philosophy across the country. I would like to welcome our admin and host, Professor Pramod Kumar Das, and the moderator of the session, Professor Dr. K. Omnan Rao. With this, I welcome all of you once again. Now, I request our first speaker, Professor Ashok Kumar Tarai, to speak on the scheduled topic. Over to Professor Tarai. Over to Professor Tarai.
A very good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for this generous introduction. I don't think I deserve all that. I'm also very much thankful to the organizers of Philosophy Family, which is basically the brainchild of Professor Das, Professor K. Narayan Rao, and Kailash Chandra Maharana. So I'm very much thankful to all of them for this opportunity, for giving this opportunity to speak on a very provocative topic that is called secularism. Now, I must confess one thing before proceeding towards my presentation, that I do not have any research credentials on this particular topic. That I did my PhD and I have been working on analytic philosophy, particularly Wittgenstein's philosophy of language. But I do have interest on certain political concepts, for example, democracy, the idea of nation state, the idea of secularism, and so on. So I keep reading them, and I found it a little disturbing, this idea of secularism, when we discuss about the idea of secularism. And because of that, I have been engaged in reading this topic for some time. So let us begin with the presentation. I have a PowerPoint presentation to make. Okay. Just give me 2 minutes. Why is that I'm not able to show my PPT? Yes. Right. I hope it is visible to all of you. Is it?
Yes, visible. Yes, visible, sir.
Okay.
It's
Thank
visible.
you. Thank you. All right. So, as I told that, this idea of secularism is a very provocative idea. I mean, not only thought-provoking, but also it creates a lot of anxiety that if we try to understand religion, state, and citizenship, or individual for that matter. So it creates a lot of anxiety. So the anxiety lies in juxtaposing these three major concepts called individual, individual, state, and religion. And I will be trying to talk about that in this lecture. But prior to that, what I have in mind is basically this, that when I say debating secularism, I am not actually trying to critique you or trying to criticize the idea of secularism as I do the idea of religious fundamentalism. So the alternative that we have against secularism is the idea of theocracy, right? So, so you have theocratic countries, you have secular countries, or secular state, or theocratic states. So I do not intend to do that, and I'm not, very much, I'm not at all interested to talk about religious fundamentalism, and it doesn't intellectually sort of excite me. So, so what is the option left to me is this, that I want to understand the genealogy of secularism, and I want to highlight it is not very important to sort of seek through secularism rather than finding out the idea of secular in the understanding of secularism. So my point of view is this, that we need to first locate the idea of secular instead of secularism. Okay? So not exactly instead of secularism, but within the understanding of secularism, we need to highlight the idea of secular, so that it creates a kind of culture of tolerance, a culture of understanding our own rituals, our own traditions, culture of understanding each other. So this is my primary focus. So moving on, what are the things that I will be discussing in this presentation is particularly this. I will be trying to define what is secular and secularism, and then I will talk about the conceptual framework of secularism, and then I will try to highlight the typical Indian case of secularism, as long as the constitutional arrangement is concerned. And perhaps if it is possible, I will also try to talk about the philosophy of secularism, which is somehow different from the political ideology of secularism, as long as India is concerned. And then I will try to highlight the Indian, I wouldn't say current debate, but yeah, it has been roughly 2 decades. I think in late 90s, there are certain Indian scholars who have come into the debate that whether secularism has to be rejected or it has to be argued for and so on. So I will try to highlight a little bit on that, and I will take something from that debate, and it is particularly from Professor Ashish Nandi, that who tries to talk about religion in terms of ideology and religion in terms of faith. So from there, I'll also try to situate secular in secularism. So this is what my plan of presentation is. Let's see how much I can do. So, so let's first try to understand the idea of secular. Okay. Now, there is this professor called Talal Asad, who is a very renowned professor at Berkeley University, I suppose, if he had not moved out of that place. And he has written a very scintillating, very thought-provoking book, which is particularly a reply to the idea of secular age, which is written by Charles Taylor. So that is, the book's name is called Formation of Secular. Now, this book was published in 2003. Why I'm mentioning the year, it is important because this book also tries to look at the idea of Muslim identity, the idea of Christianity, and so on, in the post September 11 thing. So, so he tries to critique Charles Taylor's idea of secularism, that secularism is something that is something really great and which is being which is coming out of modernity and so on. So he is trying to basically critique that, but I am not interested in his critique, but I'm interested in the concept that he develops called the idea of secular. So he says secular is an epistemic category, right? So what does it mean by saying that it is an epistemic category? It means that it involves a human subject into it. So in understanding what? In understanding the idea of religion. Right? So unlike secularism, which I'll be discussing in the next slide perhaps, so secularism will be considered as a political doctrine, it's a political ideology, which is basically a qualification of the state. So contrast to that, Asad is saying that the idea of secular is something that the subject or the individual is a political term, but I should use subject or self. Self is it's someone who is always wrestling with the idea of religion. So it is always questioning. It is always engaged in understanding, or sometimes it becomes part of it, sometimes it questions. So it is coming out of this idea of form of life, if I can put, or take the example of Leonard Wittgenstein's concept of forms of life. So he is saying it is that individuality, it is that subject which is always engaged with religion in a very, from an epistemic point of view. So in that sense, it is conceptually prior to secularism. Okay. Now, the idea of secularism is an alien concept, so which is given to us that because it is an arrangement that which assures law and order, which assures perhaps good life and so on. So prior to that, okay, we have a subject, not exactly an individual, but a self, which engaged with religion. So we need to pay attention to that. And it is something culturally there. So when I'm born in a family, Hindu family, Muslim family, or Christian family, or Jainism, Buddhism, or whatever religion that you talk about, I'm engrossed, I'm engaged with that cultural activities. So it is in that sense, and secularism I learned later. So it is in that sense, it is something that is conceptually prior to secularism, right? And as I told you, that it is something that is agent-centric, it is self-centric not in a very egoistic sense or not in a very selfish way, but it is like, it is self-engagement. So that is something has to be understood. And now the question is, if somebody is secular and somebody is religious, Like, are they mutually exclusive? No, right? So what does it mean to say that somebody is religious? It means that there are certain religious principles, and if you are following them, you are participating them, you are encouraging people to do that, and you are part of a group, you are part of an institutionalized religion, so then you portray that you are a religious person, right? Now, what does it mean to be a secular? A secular, as I said, that it is part of an epistemic category. You always constantly engage yourself in understanding those rituals, and you are part of it. At the same time, you are also trying to yourself and other, right? So in that sense, they are not at all mutually exclusive. You can be religious, at the same time, you can be secular. You can be only secular, you may not be religious, right? So in that sense, they are not, mutually exclusive at all, right? So if this is the conception of secular, then let us try to understand the idea of secularity. Okay? Now, as I said that the conceptual structure of secularism consists of these three major concepts: individual, state, religion, and this is the idea that popularly available. A lot of people have discussed on this, and I am following this scholar called D. Smith, who has an article of a book chapter in the book called Secularism and Its Critics, edited by Rajiv Bhargava. And this is my main source of this talk. So anybody who is wondering what I'm saying, they may refer to this book. Okay. So these are the three major concepts that secularism consists of. Now, what is an individual, what is a state, and what is a religion? Now, what is individual here is a political subject. It is not a subject, as I told, that a secular subject or a religious subject. No, not in that sense, but it is a political subject, which means you are a subject of a state. Okay? So there is a tacit agreement between you and, if I follow the social contract philosophy, that there is a tacit agreement between state and individual. So in that sense, I'm a citizen. I have some right to perform, some right to take away, and some duties to perform. Right. So this is what my relationship with my state, right? In the sense I'm considered to be an individual. So whenever state considers me, it considers me an individual. Now, let's come to the second concept. These conceptions will be much clearer when I will be talking about the relationship of all these three things. So the second concept is called state. Now, quite often we misunderstand the idea of state with nation, okay? State with country. I think that's a problem. So state is not something a nation is. So a nation is what it is, a cultural entity, right? So when you take the example of India, India can be a nation. Okay, right? What is the idea of nation here? That it represents a particular kind of culture or a variety of culture, language, religions, and so on. So you have food habits, you have different kinds of tradition, different kinds of cultures, starting from Jammu Kashmir to Kerala, right? So that is the understanding of nation, okay? And perhaps the idea of nationality is coming from that. So, but state is, remember, it is a political entity. Okay? Now, what is a political entity here? That you have the state is an idea which guarantees certain documents, certain written documents which are very, very legitimate, unlike the idea of nation, right? So which means you have a constitution, you have executive, you have judiciary, you have all these things, okay? And that is how a state functions, right? So it's a very legitimate, it's a very political entity in that sense. Now, what is this thing called religion, which has to do with a lot of, which has to do with secularism in a very big way. So what is this thing called religion? Now, quite often also people misuse it by saying that, well, religion is something that is my understanding of God, how I am engaged with God, it's like a spiritual journey and so on. No. In this case, when we talk about secularism, I think religion is understood in this way, that it is an institutionalized religion, right? So it is something that is very much social. Okay? It is not individualistic. Okay? It is very much social. So you have Hinduism, you have Islam, you have Christianity, you have Buddhism, Sikhism, and so on, right? So these are the sociological understanding of religion that we will be talking about, and which are not individualistic at all. So these are collective things. Okay. So if these concepts are understood, let me try to talk about the relationship, which is very, very important. So the first relationship that you make between religion and individual, and I'm saying these are the three relationships. If you can guarantee these three relationships, then a state is considered to be a secular state. So this is my strict definition of secularism. Okay. But also we use secularism in different ways also. So I'm not getting into that. So these are the three relationships if you can guarantee, or which means if these characteristics are part of a state, then you consider a state as a secular state, or it is following the idea of secularism, right? So, so the first one is called, the relationship that you are making out of religion and individual. So this is a very, very important relationship. Now, so individuals, those are political, individuals, they also participate in certain religious activities. Okay? So their relationship of religion should not be, so to say, dictated by the state. Remember, this relationship, the very idea of relation is not important here. What is important is the involvement of state is something that is very important. So that has to be rejected. Okay. So in this relation, religion and individual, it gives right to freedom of religion, which means each and every individual has freedom to participate in any kind of religion they want to have. They can reject some religion and convert to some other religions, and they can also, they can also be irreligious. Okay? They can be atheist. They can be anything, right? So they have that right. So they have got that freedom without offending somebody, right? So, but in this activity, this whole activity of having freedom of religion, okay, should not be dictated by the state, which means the state machinery or the idea of state has to be rejected here in this relationship. So no interference of state. Okay, so that is something very, very crucial to this relationship. Now the second one is about the idea of state and individual. Okay, I think I have talked about it. So this is the idea of citizenship, which means state should guarantee each and every individual, okay, and not considering their religion. So this is something very, very important. It is because religion has to be rejected here. So in this relation, my relation with my state has nothing to do with my religion. Okay, so religion should not play any role here. Okay? So, like the first one, religion and individual, the state should not have any role. In the second case, the religion should not have any role. Now, unlike A and B, C is a very, this is the central thesis of secularism. Unlike A and B, C is, it's not a relationship. Okay? So it is a separation between state and religion. Okay? Now, which means state as a political entity should function with certain autonomy. Okay? Whatever the legislation, whatever the, the written documents that it has got, it has to function in that way. Okay. But religion as socialized or as an institution would also function in its own way, which means they must not interfere with each other. There has to be a separation between state and religion, right? Now, this, whether this separation is completely possible or not, that's a separate debate. Now, so what is important here is this, that whenever you talk about secularism as a political doctrine, as I have been talking about, that the more each one of them, that is state or religion, if they try to plot with each other, okay, then there is a danger to the idea of secularism. Okay? So if state tries to plot with religion, that it tries to negotiate with religion, or religion tries to negotiate with the function of state, then there is a problem, which means secularism is not so strictly followed. So I will, on the basis of this relationship, I will try to talk about that can be three different versions or three different types of secularism that can, give birth. The following, particularly this relation called this separation called state and religion. All right. So and this is something which is mentioned by Arvind Sharma, Professor Arvind Sharma, who is also a professor of theology. So this is the first one is called the negative form of secularism. Okay. So what is the negative form of secularism? The negative form of secularism says that the separation is something that is separation in a very literal sense. Okay, so which means the state is trying to be hostile to religion, okay, right? So that which means it is being hostile to the freedom of religion. So the first one, that is the A, religion and individual, is little bit problematic, because if you talk about the separation very strictly, then you have to be there has to be hostility towards A, freedom of religion, that is the corporate or institutional form of religion will not be followed. So that is which we call it the negative form of separation in a very clear and defined term, right? Now, and in that sense, you also sometimes, out of anxiety, you declare your state as an atheist state or an irreligious state, and so on, right? So, and whether it can be also called a secular state or not, that also is also debatable, right? For example, Soviet Union, right, which collapsed. All of us will know that, but it also tried to do that. So, and that is a problem. So, so the second one, it's called the neutral form of secularism, and that is it's something that the A, that is the freedom of religion, and the C, separation. The idea that they should not conflict with each other. And what is important is they always try to make the case that there should not be any conflict. But if at all there is any kind of conflict, then it is not A that overpowers the C, it is rather the separation that overpowers the A. Okay. So there is some kind of similarity between the neutral and negative, but negative is something that is very, very hostile to religion, but here it is not like that. If only there is a conflict, then C must be followed. This is what the separation must be followed, right? So this is called the neutral form of secularism, which people in the West celebrate, and it is perhaps United States of America can be considered to be having a neutral form of secularism. Okay. So now the positive form of secularism, and I am interested in this point. That what is the positive form of secularism? The state is secular in the sense of possessing no established church or religion. So in that sense, it is secular. But nevertheless, it also reserves the right to intervene in the religious sphere in a protective capacity, which means if there is any problem, it's just unlike the second one, the neutral form of secularism. Here, we are very much interested in the relationship of A and B. Okay. So C is something we can avoid. So may not be followed literally, right? So this is called the positive form of secularism. And I feel the positive form of secularism is something that India is following, right? So, as a political doctrine, secular. So let us try to understand a little bit about the constitutional framework of India. Okay, and I'm not a student of political science, but I just tried to pick out certain things from here. Okay, so the constitutional framework of India says that if you look at the A, that is the freedom of religion, which is very much guaranteed. That is the right to freedom of religion, Articles 25 to 28. Okay. Now, what is interesting about this relation is this, or this point is this, that it not only guarantees the individual freedom of religion, but also guarantees the collective freedom of religion, right? So it means collectively, you can also propagate your religion, you can celebrate whatever you want to do. Collectively, you can also convert, okay, from one religion to another religion. So that is something unique to our constitutional framework, right? So not only we have individual freedom of religion, we also have collective freedom of religion, that is Article 26. Okay, so quickly come to this second point, that is the state and the individual relation, citizenship. Of course, it is not very much explicitly there, but right to equality, Article 14 to 15, that shows that yes, the state shall not discriminate. 15.1 says that the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. So pick out this term called religion, which means the state is not treating you differently, okay, just because you are Hindu, just because you are Muslim, and so on. So how the politicians are doing that, I'm not getting into that. But this is the constitutional framework, and grounds only of religion. Okay. So caste, sex, I'm not getting into it. Though there are also discriminations and what we call it positive discrimination in case of reservation and all. So I'm not getting into that. So one thing that I want to highlight here is this, that in the Constitution itself, that it shows that you, even if you belong to a minority religion or any other kind of religion, then you are not considered to be a second class citizen. Okay. So you are par with the majority religion that is there, right? So this is the right to equality, Article 15, which guarantees the idea of citizenship. Okay? Now, which also very recently draws a lot of debate about the CA thing, Citizen Amendment Act, so on. So people who are against this, I think primarily because of this reason, that it alludes to the idea of constitution. So, okay, so the third one is state and religion, that is the separation of state and religion. So in our constitutional framework, we do not have a clear pronounced separation, right? So in fact, we are trying to say that state can intervene. Okay, so if there is any problem, okay, so it is not that state cannot do that. No, the separation is not at all felt in a very explicit way, but it is felt in a very implicit way, I should say. So in this way, that there is no provision regarding an official state religion. So you can, so in that sense, you can say it is a theocratic state. So, and there can be no religious instructions in public educational institutions. This is very, very important, and which draws a lot of attention, and it also disturbs all of us that in public places or public educational institutions, public offices, should there be any religious instructions or religious ceremonial activities, right? And then what will happen to how to maintain it? That is also a difficult thing. So, and there can be no taxes to support any particular religion. So it is because of these three reasons, perhaps, the separation is felt, but it is not explicitly felt because of the other articles. Okay, now, so this is the conceptual thing that I try to talk about. Now, what I'm trying to understand that, the idea of secularism, as it is clear now from the discussion that I followed, it's a political ideology. It is an alien concept. I'm not just blaming that it is a Western concept and we have tried to borrow it and so on. no, Charles Taylor heavily argued that even if you are living in a very diverse society like India, it applies to you also. I mean, it is good for you to follow secularism. And he has given very good arguments for that, and I'm not getting into that. So my point is, yes, within the context of secularism, so I'm not talking about theocracy, I'm talking about secularism here. Now, in that, we also need to involve, also need to understand that, what it means to be a secular, as I started with Talal Asad's concept of secular, right? So what is a human subject, not exactly an individual, a political entity, but a human subject, a living being, an ethical entity, I would say, or a normative agent. So what exactly we need to do? Okay. So, so how can we, find the rooted value that where we are living? So that identification is something that tells us that we are doing a little bit of epistemic exercise to understand our own system, to understand our own culture, tradition, whatever. Right? So this is something very, very important we need to do. Now, why did I pick this thing? It is important to know that once you avail the idea of political doctrine secularism, we usually understand at a very surface level that secularism means the separation between state and religion, and anybody who is religious has to be undermined, should not be entertained, should not have any kind of credential, and things like that. So this is something problematic, right? So yes, secularism is good enough, no problem. But at the same time, we need to also talk about who we are. Okay? So it is about a metaphysical subject, or it is, sorry, not exactly it's about a normative subject that we need to talk about. And that is, for me, it's very, very important. Right? So now I will get into this idea of secular in a moment. But prior to that, let me also talk about why do we talk about secularism, I mean, particularly the separation. As I said, there are very good arguments and which have to be thought out very clearly, I mean, which have to be contemplated very thoroughly. So the first one is the autonomy argument. All of us will know that they are two different entities, religion and state. So they should have their autonomy in a different way. Right, so they should not be involved in juxtaposing each other the ideas, primarily because they will lose their autonomy. So, so that is one of the first arguments, and then the argument for establishing equal status, equal value, both for state and religion, which follows from the autonomy argument. And then the third thing, which also disturbs all of us, that we need to also curb the political and religious absolutism, which is also a very dangerous trend that we can see. Okay? So political means we can have a very authoritarian state. If you strictly talk about the separation, I mean, if you do not separate, okay, so anything that is religious, that can become a very harsh kind of a political thing. I mean, harsh in the sense very authoritarian, and applies to religion also. So they would start feeling that they are the absolute, or they are the fundamental categories, like religious fundamentalism. So we need to tackle that. We need to also debate on that. Okay. Now, so following that, yes, is there anybody who wants to say something? Okay. So and this, the last thing is that it is not only the political thing, it is also in a religion that we need to also reason out, we need to also rationally engage the idea of religion. Okay. So to take the fanaticism, the fundamental entity, as we sometimes try to celebrate. So, this is something, this must not be rejected, this must not be done. No, it's not like that. We need to talk about them time to time, okay, and there has to be constant debate. Okay. And out of that debate, we will evolve. So once you say that it is fundamental, it is final, and there I think that's a problem. So we need to bargain that also. So these are very good arguments, right? So there is no doubt about it. I am not against this idea. But at the same time, I am also trying to, as I told, invoke the idea of normative subjectivity or subject, right, into it, so that we live in a very peaceful, in a very tolerant society, right? And this debate, as I told, goes back to late 90s, where Ashish Nandi, Partha Chatterjee, T.N. Morton, they were of the opposite side, those who said, okay, secularism can be good, but it has also problems. Okay? So it tries to treat subjects or human beings in a very, very different way. So we are not like that. All of a sudden, if an alien concept comes to you, be it state power, be it anything, okay, and that becomes a problem for the cultural subject. Okay, the subject is inherently cultural, following Wittgenstein's idea of self in the society. So we need to also guarantee that, we need to also make sure there is some sort of freedom for the self to grow and following a particular evolutionary, social evolutionary, social evolutionary process, right? So in that sense, I'm not talking about Partha Chatterjee and T.N. Morton. I have only in mind is Professor Ashish Nandi, who tries to distinguish between religion as a faith and religion as ideology. So he says how you understand religion is something that is very, very important, right? So religion as a faith, that you always take the idea of tolerance from there, the idea of plurality, the idea of compassion, the idea of love. Okay. So if you are engaged in it, okay, right? Now, if you try to talk about it, okay, mostly in public spaces, then you are trying to have a political image of religion, or you are in fact trying to politicize the idea of religion. So you are portraying religion as an ideology, and which is a problem for both secularism and for the society as well. So, and this political ideology involves that we are fighting over religion to ensure political and economic interest. So there is an utilitarian kind of utilitarian thesis added to it, that we are not talking about religion just for the sake of it, and we love it, we are engrossed it, we are engaged in it. No, not at all. So don't think that somebody who is talking about religion, it's really very it's really engaged in religion. No, not at all. So he is actually he has actually got certain interest, and that can be political or economic, right? So, and that creates a further problem, and that is the politics of secularism that we are witnessing today. Okay, and in that sense, Ashish Nandi tries to categorize 4 ways. Okay, and he says there can be 4 kinds of people who are in politics or who are in public life, and he says the first category is someone who is not at all religious, right? Not in the private space nor in the public space. And he takes the example of Jawaharlal Nehru, who is considered to be an agnostic, and others, right? And then he also talks about the second category, where he says there are also certain people who are religious in the private space as well as in the public space. And he takes the example of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He says he is a person who talks about religion. He portrays religiosity in a public life as well as in the private life. So there is no sort of hypocrisy there. Okay. So in both the cases, you do not find any kind of hypocrisy. But I will point out there are 2 cases where there is some sort of hypocrisy involved. That there are also cases people will, in private, they do not care about religion. In fact, they have openly said that we are atheist or we are irreligious people. But in public, in the sense, as long as the politics is concerned, they will fight for this. Okay. So, and then he gives the example of V.D. Savarkar. People like, even it is also debatable that if I can bring Ambedkar into the picture, because Ambedkar doesn't seem to be a very religious person, but the way he converted himself to Buddhism along with many others, so it showed that he is also trying to portray religiosity without being religious, right? So this is the third category. And the fourth category is this, that you are, which is less hypocritical, that you are in private life you are extremely religious, okay, and then in public you do not show up anything, right? Which means you do not try to politicize the idea of religion. Okay? And he gives the example of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, right? Now I do not want to get into whether these are the legitimate categories, but what I want to point out from Mondi's explanation is this, that look at the idea of politics of religion. What happens? Why we are involved in politicizing religion? What is the output? What is the consequence of it? Now, the consequence is this, that once you are into a religion seriously, I'm talking about the secular, the idea of secular in normative subjects. Now, you are also, of course, carrying an epistemic category, but at the same time, you are also a very emotional kind of person, right? And that can be played out in politics. So that sentiment can be very well played out. Now, once you are heavily epistemic, you can check that, and you can also curb the religious tension that is happening in the society. And top of that, you become a normative subject, and this is what I am trying to follow. Okay, so why is it important to be secular in secularism? Okay, now secularism, as I said, that it is a very top-down approach, right? So there is a state and the multiple diversity there. So and then you try to bring an alien concept and say, well, this is what the state would function, and you are, the religion is something that it has nothing to do with state has nothing to do with religion, and then you try to also, unintentionally, you try to also curb the freedom of religion, or you try to caricature the engagement that human beings have with religion, and that becomes a problem. And this is a top-down approach, right? If you start from secularism. Now, if you start with the bottom-up approach, that doesn't treat an individual just as a citizen, rather as a self and epistemic category, as I've been saying, that constitute a secular and an imaginary alien doctrine of secularism. So I think this is something that has to be taken into account, right? Along with Talal Asad and Ashish Nandi, if I have understood them clearly. Now, I want to end with this quotation, since I love Wittgenstein a lot, and reading Wittgenstein for half a decade, and 1.5 decade. So it's like he says in the book called Culture and Value that religion, as it were, the calm bottom of the sea at its deepest point, which remains calm, however high the waves on the surface may be. So it is that deep engagement which is very important. And I am saying this, believe me that I am not a religious person. And as of now, I haven't started worshipping, or and at the same time, I don't find it funny, not at all. So perhaps we need to talk about it a little more. So this is what from my side. Thank you very much for listening. I think I have finished my time. Yes, and my things to say. Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much, Professor Tarai, for your excellent deliberation on the scheduled topic, debating secularism. Though the topic itself is very vast, you have made a comprehensive study and conceptual analysis of different fundamental issues while debating the idea of secularism in the form of political ideology and finding out the deep-rooted value in form of secularism. Sir, as religion and state have their own autonomy, you have tried to conclude to be secular in secularism. Thanks so much for your excellent deliberation. Now we have to move to the second session, and after the second session, we have to moderate and we have to find out the conclusion. Now, I would like to call upon our second speaker, Professor Kumar Chattopadhyay, the retired professor.